Welcome back to the channel. Today the topic's going to be my personal top 10 NBA players of my lifetime. Okay, so I was born in 1983. So basically the guidelines for this is um, the player had to play after 1983. Okay, so obviously you could get a guy like Julius Erving, which played till like 1986. Um, he could be included in this, but somebody like say Wilt Chamberlain would not be included in this. Uh, so this is my top 10 greatest. What I feel the top 10 greatest uh, NBA players in the last 40 years. Um, and I do include, even with the requisite that they had to play not after 1983, I do include their career before 1983. So that'll come into play with one of these players. And honestly, uh, there's a few more on here on this list that it could include, but I feel like even after 1983, some of these guys were pretty good. But we'll get to it in just a second. Once again, this is a sports debate channel. That's what this is. So, uh, by no means am I saying that my opinion is the right one. Um, but I will argue my points. That there's no doubt about that. Uh, and this just being basketball, I have a basketball background. I'm a basketball coach. I've been in the game for my entire life, pretty much. Came from a basketball family. Coached for 22 years, so I do have a little expertise in basketball. But like I said, obviously we can debate. Obviously, there's a pretty heated debate between a couple of guys that are on this list that just happened in the world today. Um, and we'll go over that. So to start, this is once again just my top 10. Who I think is the top 10 greatest players of my lifetime, basically the last 40 years. So I think at number 10, Steph Curry. Okay, Steph Curry obviously is probably the greatest shooter of all times. I would say he is the greatest shooter of all times. That would be my opinion. You could throw some guys in there, but when you look at just the total fact that obviously he's a great shooter percentage wise and all of that, but then you just look at being the best player on his team for most of his career, with the exception of maybe 2 or 3 years, maybe his rookie year. Uh, maybe, and then uh, the 3 years he had Kevin Durant. But uh, that I mean, just when you look at that and you just look at the shots he's had to make, the clutch shots that he's made in his career, I think that the greatest shooter of all times. Um, but beyond that, like that's kind of the thing that everybody wants to talk about, and they want to look at it and say, "Oh, he's the greatest shooter of all times," and that's what makes him great. He's one of the greatest playmakers of all times. This guy is a ball handling wizard. He's got great vision. Um, you know, he's not what I would call a great defensive player, but he makes key defensive plays. He can guard if he needs to guard. If he needs to sit down and guard somebody for a possession, two possessions, three possessions, he can do that. Just his overall game makes him one of the greats. maybe he's not a top 10 guy in your opinion or whatever, or even a top 10 guy in the last 40 years in your opinion. Maybe not. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. All right. Um, I would say that the championship, I believe it was in 21, 22, whatever year it was, their last Golden State championship, 22, I think. Uh, I would say that probably put him above some of the guys that I would have had. Isaiah Thomas, a Steve Nash, just in the point guard realm. Uh, I would say that probably put him above those guys. Um, just having a championship, just having one championship, puts him above Chris Paul, in my opinion. Uh, Although I do think that if Chris Paul uh, ever won a championship, even now where he's probably not going to be the best player, the second best player on the team, I think that does have some clout in regards to him being one of the greatest point guards. He's not like I think Curry's already passed him regardless. Uh, I don't know that he can get to a Magic Johnson level, but I think that with Chris Paul, it'd be the Isaiah Thomas level maybe, uh, John Stockton or somebody like that. Discussion. I don't know. That's probably a different topic. That's a different topic for another day. But uh, I do think that Steph Curry is right there with one of the top 10 players of the last 40 years, and probably a top 15, maybe even top 10 player in NBA history. But I think him still being a player, and I don't know that he's there now, but I think saying that maybe a top 10 player in NBA history, that's some of that is kind of the looking forward, looking into the future, maybe what he can do later on. Um, Number 9, I would have Kobe Bryant. Okay, now I know there's probably some discussion here, there, uh, whether he's a top 5 player, whatever, and I don't say this to be mean or to but I do think that maybe with Kobe, I think that maybe he's been moved up on some people's list because of because of the tragedy that happened with him, um, and that probably has impacted me. I think there's maybe a player or two players who have passed him since he had the accident that unfortunately he lost his life in. Um, but I mean, what can you say about the guy? He was a vital part. You know, he was the Robin, whatever, to Shaq's Batman in a great, 3-year run, 5-year run, whatever it was. That like, I mean, you can't. I mean, they were the big dogs for 4 or 5 years there. 3-year stretch, and then kind of had a lull. And then they came back, and people forget that '04 team that the Pistons beat. That was a juggernaut team with Karl Malone and Gary Payton. Karl Malone hurts his knee in the playoffs. They probably are rolling to an NBA championship before Karl Malone hurts himself. People forget that, and I will on that note, I will say that the Pistons just thoroughly kicked their butts. All right, they thoroughly beat them pretty handily in the NBA Finals. And Kobe had a great NBA Finals. Now, some people say, "Oh, that was selfish," blah blah blah. You could say that a lot about him. But I mean, I think his greatness is evident, and a lot of that is testament to his work ethic. uh, but he, something, the scoring, the shooting, the blah, blah, blah. People look a lot on the offensive end. People forget this dude was a defensive stopper. He was a defensive, like in his younger days before, when he was with Shaq. This guy was a shutdown guy defensively. He was a shutdown guy defensively. We're going to get to another guy later on that I think probably puts him. I think that he probably gets elevated because of his defense. But Kobe Bryant was a shutdown guy. I remember Kobe Bryant in the regular season. I'm sure he did it maybe in the playoffs a little bit, but they probably took him off of the better players. But this guy had a run where, he was guarding. I mean, he was guarding guys like Allen Iverson and just shutting them down. Now, maybe Iverson got 25 that night, but he was going to get 25 on 35 shots, on 40 shots. He wasn't going to get 25 just, going whatever, 8 for 12 or something. That wasn't going to happen. He was going to have to jack up shots. He was going to have to force a lot of stuff. Kobe could guard, 1 through 4 pretty easily in his heyday. I think that is that's a big time deal. All right. Was a great, even though he was selfish, he took a lot of shots. I'll admit he was a great passer, had great court vision. Obviously, his intelligence, his basketball intelligence, and just his overall intelligence was off the charts. For a basketball player, a lot of people have issues with him. A lot of basketball peers have issues with him. He was remarkable. Okay, and I think he was the number 9 player. For me, he was the number 9 player. Right. Number 8 player was Shaquille O'Neal. Okay, here's the deal with Shaq. All right, the two things and the reason that I put him above Kobe. There are 2 reasons. Okay, so the first reason would be Kobe was the Batman, was the Robin to Shaq's Batman. All right, Shaq was the man on those teams. There was no doubt. All right. Sure, you can say 1A, 1B, whatever you want to say on it. Shaq was the man on those teams. All right? Okay, now, what I think puts him over the Kobe, because Kobe obviously had a 3-year, 4-year run later on in his career that was just as good as Shaq's 3-4-year run when they were together. But the thing that I think that Shaq that puts him ahead of Kobe is, for one thing, he's probably the most dominant player I've ever seen, ever. He may be the most dominant player, maybe Wilt, if you want to throw in some of these other guys, maybe a Russell or whatever for the defense and but Shaq was the most dominant player in my lifetime, and probably ever in the NBA. Okay. He also was the man on a dynasty in the early 90s that could have been one of the great dynasties, in NBA history. And it probably would have bled into, if not totally taken over, the Lakers dynasty that Shaq obviously was a part of. And that was with the Orlando Magic. Then he had a later, after the Lakers, obviously he won a championship, which with Dwayne Wade. Dwayne Wade was a better player on that team, especially once they got to the NBA Finals. Shaq was probably the guy in 2005, and then in 2006 in the regular season, Dwayne Wade was the man in the playoffs. And once again, probably a different video, but the Mavs got screwed out of that NBA title that year. But I think that those are the two things that kind of bookend that time with Kobe. I think that puts him over the top. Plus, him just being dominant. So he would be my number 8 player. My number 7 player is Kevin Durant. I kind of went back and forth, to be honest with you, about is Kevin Durant better than Kobe or Shaq? Is he better? And I maybe I'm kind of looking forward to his next 2-3 years, and maybe I'm saying, oh well, maybe he gets a championship, maybe he gets what I call an old man championship, where he's the 4th option, 5th option, or he's a bench guy for whoever, the Miami Heat or some team that they win the NBA title. He contributes, but he's not the man. Maybe that's it. But I think the thing that puts him over the top is obviously, his longevity. How long he's done this is remarkable because he's still playing at a really high level. The fact that he's went through 2 major leg injuries and he's still he's Kevin Durant, right? And you look at like a Kobe who had a major leg injury late in his career, and he was never the same guy. He may have had some numbers. He was never the same guy. He wasn't as explosive. His game just wasn't as the same. And so I think that puts Durant a little bit above him. I think that his total career has been better than Shaq's. And I know that's probably saying a mouthful, but that's what I believe. And the reason that he's over Stephen Curry is because he played with Stephen Curry for 3 years and he was the best player. People argue about it, blah, blah, blah. They say stuff. No, the man was Kevin Durant. All right. The team may have been Stephen Curry's team, but Stephen Curry wasn't the guy on those teams. All right. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. We can debate about it, but there's no discussion about it. Go watch the games. Go watch the NBA Finals. Kevin Durant was the guy on those teams. He was the guy. All right. You look at the game game where he tears his Achilles in the NBA Finals against the Raptors. All right. So he's had some. I think he had a knee injury, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe like a strained ligament or something in his knee. Missed some of the. I think they were playing Portland in the NBA in the Western Conference Finals. They struggled to get there, and they get there. The Raptors are beating them, whatever it was, 3-1, I think, or something like that. 2-1. I can't remember the exact game he got hurt, but he comes back. Maybe it was a 2-0. Maybe I can't remember. But anyways, he comes back. He was the guy, coming off of a knee injury, he it was kind of one of those I don't know if Durant can play or what. And, he willed himself to play in that game and unfortunately hurt himself. He was killing. He was the best player on the floor, even with Kawhi Leonard. He was the best player on the floor during that stretch. But you look at it, and he, like I said, he was the guy. He was the guy. He was the guy for all 3 of those years. All right, he was their best player, and you look at what he's done with what he did with the Thunder. You look at what he did in Brooklyn. You think about the Bucks winning the NBA title. Maybe they don't even get to the NBA Finals, except for he had a size 17 instead of a size 16. All right, so those are things that I looked at, and like I said, I think that just the totality of his career and the longevity that he's been this good for this long that's why I have him at number 7. All right, number 6. And this is where you start kind of getting maybe into an argument standpoint. I think with some of these guys from 6 to 3, maybe even 6 to 4. But Magic Johnson would be my number 6 guy. And basically, he would probably be higher, but he just didn't. His career was cut short. And even I sometimes I hear people say, "Oh, well, his career was cut short," blah blah blah. Acting like he had 5 really good years left. He didn't have 5 really good years. All right, that's not the truth. That's not a. He was just. I mean, he was a good player, but he wasn't a dominant player anymore. In 1992, 93, whatever the year was, he wasn't that player anymore that he was in the 80s and maybe even the early 90s. But the thing about him was he was so cerebral, and then obviously he was a freak in terms of his position, playing point guard at 6'9", 220, 230, whatever he was. He was just unbelievable. As a player, one of the great competitive guys, all right? And you'll learn through this channel when I talk basketball and really any sport, but the thing is I use the term ultra competitive. I love ultra competitive guys, all right? And I always think that you have to gamble. You have to take the good and the bad. You have to gamble on ultra competitive guys. Russell Westbrook should always be gambled on. He's an ultra competitive guy, right? Like, that's a guy you need, okay? People can say, oh, this and that. He's a great teammate. Teammates love him. Why do teammates love him? Well, he's probably a good guy to them. That might be it. But he's ultra competitive, right? They don't have to worry about him showing up. Magic Johnson was the same way. Magic Johnson showed up. You didn't have to worry about him showing up game in, game out. Now, early in his career, if you watch some of these documentaries and, Winning Time kind of pointed to this, but early in his career, yeah, he probably had some selfish moments that we don't tend to look at now about him. We tend to look at through rose-colored glasses with him. A couple other guys maybe, but he was a guy. He was a guy that he was ultra competitive. You knew he was going to show up every day. Obviously, the skill. All right. I don't know what his 3-point percentage was, but he would be a guy that in today's game, he would be incredibly hard to match up with. Incredibly hard to match up with because he would have been able to knock an open shot down from the perimeter. He would have been able to take you in the post, and he would have been able to get you off the dribble. I don't want to compare him to guys in the NBA now, but I just looking. This wasn't his game. This wasn't his game. I don't want to say this was his game. They have different games. They're different players, but I would say if you watch a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and you watch Magic Johnson, if Magic Johnson was playing in 2023-24, I would say that you could look and they may have similar games, kind of that mid-range, kind of, just being bigger than the guy guarding them and being able to shoot over the top of them, being able to get them, on the block or, in today's age, you don't really have a back to the basket, but you have a short post or whatever, getting offensive rebounds and putbacks and doing stuff like that. I think he would, he was great in the 80s, the early 90s, in college with the late 70s and, winning the 79 championship at Michigan State. He was fantastic, but I think that the game he would have now in today's age, I think he probably would have been a better player now than he was back then. That's what I think. All right. So he would be my number 6 player. My number 5, and I think some people would say that maybe I'm ranking this guy a little too high, but I don't really think I am. Okay. Number 5 would be Tim Duncan. All right. This is the reason that I picked Tim Duncan. All right. Because if we consider LeBron James a small forward, all right, then, which I think he is, all right, I think that he, the majority of his career, he played small forward, so that 3, whatever you want to call it, so that's the position that he should be, this is what he is. He's the greatest small forward of all times, okay, so I think that if we're saying that Tim Duncan's the greatest 4-man of all times. All right? And I know he played center quite a bit in his career. And honestly, if you look at it, the Spurs always played like what I call a token big. All right? So they would play a guy that maybe played 20 minutes a game or 15 minutes a game at the 5, and then basically Duncan played the other 35 minutes or whatever of the game as the 5-man. Him and Robinson, you could, one was a 5, one was a 4, whatever you wanted to say. I mean, later in his career, Robinson played more high post. But, to me, Tim Duncan is the greatest 4-man of all times. He won 5 championships. Some of the best, his glass game, all right, being able to use the angles and shoot off the glass and use his angles that way. I mean, he's unbelievable with that. All right, defensively, making plays. Once again, a guy that defensively, career-wise, everybody's going to look at him offensively. The guy was one of the greatest defensive bigs ever. All right, he made one of the greatest defensive plays that I can recall just off the top of my head. Was the block that he had against the Clippers against Chris Paul, and I think it was a game 7. I think it was the last year, maybe 14, that they won the championship. He had a block on Chris Paul, game 7 to win the game. Chris Paul drove, tried to get it wide, even, trying to get it wide. Duncan swatted it out of bounds with a few seconds left, or maybe at the buzzer. I'm not sure, but he was a great defender. Once again, ultra competitive guy, even though he was super quiet about it, or at least on the outside. Maybe in the locker room he might not have been as much, but on the outside he was super quiet about it. But just an outstanding player, and I think that, like I said, I mean, the guy won 5 championships, was the best player on his team from what, like 98 to about 2012, maybe. You could kind of go back and say, maybe Tony Parker was better, and then obviously Kawhi was probably a better player in 13 and 14 than him, but just an outstanding player. But number 4 would be Larry Bird. Okay, and I know, like I said earlier when I was talking about Magic, maybe you'd say, well, Magic was a better player than Bird. I don't feel that way. Larry Bird was an elite basketball player from the day he entered the NBA. All right, he was a better player than Magic Johnson was in the early '80s. All right, he may not have been a better player than Larry Bird or than Magic Johnson was in the late '80s, but he was right there next to him. All right, And so I think that that's what puts him over the edge. Plus, he was the alpha. He was the big dog. There was never a discussion from the time he entered the NBA to the time he exited the NBA whether he was the guy. All right, even in his later years, he had a couple of years. His last couple of years, he was down with his back. He was injured, whatever. Uh, he may not have been able to get up every game and just really, perform at that level. But, you're talking about maybe he wasn't the greatest defender of all times, but with his defensive, with his rebounding, the way he was on the glass, his cerebral game defensively, obviously has some of the greatest steals of all time. Some of the most famous steals of all times. So, like defensively, he wasn't a slouch. Like a lot of people think, he was a slouch. No, he wasn't. He was viable. He was a viable defender. Right. He wasn't the greatest defender. He wasn't going to be an All NBA guy year in year out, but he was so cerebral. That made him a great defender, a very good defender, high level defender. Right, offensively, I mean, the guy was off the charts. All right, the guy was off the charts. Like, if you haven't, I mean, there's obviously a lot of videos on YouTube of him just embarrassing guys and stuff and talking trash, and there's some great videos of him. But I would stress, just go watch a game. Like, just pull up a game on YouTube, or if you see a game on NBA TV or whatever of the Celtics playing in the '80s. All right, I mean, just go watch the game. Right, go watch the game. Go watch him and Dominique in the playoffs, or it may even been regular season when the Hawks bench is celebrating him scoring. All right, I mean, just go watch some of these games. This guy offensively was amazing. All right, he was amazing offensively. All right, he could shoot it, he could dribble it, he could pass it. Great court vision. Had eyes on the side of his head and behind his head. All right, the dude was just amazing as an offensive basketball player. All right, like I said, the cerebral stuff and his rebounding ability. He was a really good rebounder, maybe even a great rebounder. So, those are things that I think put him at the number 4 level. And like I said, he was the man. All right, he was the man on his team from 1980 till 1992, probably. So, and just on the topics, with the Boston Celtics, all right, and him being the man. Like, you have to realize, like, this guy missed out on Len Bias. All right, maybe Len Bias, becomes the best player for the Celtics. Maybe he doesn't, but understand that his championship, he won 3 championships. All right, the Lakers dominated the late '80s, and then the Pistons, the very end of the '80s in '89, even '88 in the Eastern Conference. 88 to 90 was the Pistons, and then the Bulls took over, except for 2 years, where basically Jordan wasn't there. Orlando was the best team in the East, whatever. But he missed out on Len Bias, and then the latter part of his career, like I said, probably about 92, 91, 92. Was probably his last years being the man. I think he retired in 93 or 94, maybe 93. But Reggie Lewis was becoming one of the best players in the NBA when he retired. All right, and unfortunately, Reggie Lewis died. Very sudden and very way before it was time for him to leave this earth. But you look and, like, if his back doesn't fail him, maybe he might get 5, 6 more years, maybe. I don't know. Maybe 3 years. I'm not sure. Obviously, he wasn't a guy that necessarily lived the cleanest life, and he probably wasn't, doing the things that he needed to be doing in the off season to, or maybe even during the season to, elongate his career. But he did miss out on the last, 8 years of his career, 7 years of his career. He kind of missed out on what could have been. All right, so that's something. But unbelievable player, unbelievable player. Number 3 is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Like I said before, what he did before '83 goes into contention. All right, and then the longevity. All right. There's 3 players, and even like a Durant. Durant, I talked about his longevity. His longevity is because he's been really good for as long as he has. Without really decreasing. He's become a smarter player, so maybe he doesn't score as much and some of that. But that's kind of the thing on Durant. But Kobe Bryant, Kareem, and then the guy who's at number 2 for me. All 3 of those guys are. They've done it for 20 plus years. All right, so there's going to be some discussions with these next 2 guys, Kareem and then the guy at number 2, that I do think that there are certain. Sometimes people forget that they did go downhill quite a bit. Like it's not a, and I'd say quite a bit, and that's not a numbers thing. That's you watch them play, and you watch them compared to how they were in their early 30s even, and it's like, yeah, that's not the same guy. All right, and maybe they became smarter, they became better basketball players. I would admit that. They may not have been as talented, so therefore they couldn't put the numbers up that they needed to put up to be considered, they're at the top of their game or whatever. And they were more cerebral. And so maybe they were better basketball players. But just in terms of, you look and you say, hey, that guy every game, he's bringing that thing. That's not necessarily the deal. But Kareem played for 20 years, 21 years, whatever, was unstoppable, okay, for his entire career. Plus, I'm just talking NBA, but you have to throw in college. You have to throw in college. He was the greatest college basketball player ever, probably. At least when he exited, he was probably the greatest college basketball player ever. Pistol Pete comes after that. There might be a guy or 2 after that you could say, but there's no discussion. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or Lou Alcindor was the greatest college basketball player ever to play the game, at least when he graduated in 70 or 71, whatever it was, right? We like to think about him as the Celtics, right? But just here recently, Giannis broke a couple of his records with the Bucks, right? This guy played for the Milwaukee Bucks for 10 years. He was the greatest player before Giannis, the greatest player ever to play for the Bucks, all right? He's also one of probably the top 5 to 10 players ever to play for the Lakers. All right, that's unbelievable. That is just crazy how good he was. All right, you look at him, the guys that he played against. Because he was there for Wilt and Russell, those guys. He was there for those guys. Right? That was a part of his career. He played against those guys. He played against the Willis Reeds and the Cowans and all these that maybe weren't as good, but he played against the best, right? He was in the NBA with the Moses Malone. He was in the NBA with the Walton with good feet. He was in the NBA with early Patrick Ewing, early Akeem Olajuwon. He was in the NBA with these guys, right? So, you just look at all the great players that he played, the great centers he played against. Robert Parrish. We'd be remiss without mentioning him. So, one of the great players of all times, and definitely one of the greatest players of my lifetime, and that I've seen play. Number two, y'all probably know by now who it is. It's LeBron James. All right. I'm not the biggest LeBron James fan. Okay, I have some critiques of him. I'm not wanting to critique him too much in this video. There will be other videos, I'm sure, where I will critique Mr. James. But just on this, he's the number two player, I feel, all times, regardless of eras. But in my lifetime, he's definitely the second best player I've ever seen. And like I said, a lot of that is longevity, right? He was a better player for longer than Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was. Okay, now that being said, if you add the 4 years, the one freshman year that obviously Abdul-Jabbar could play, and also, hey, let's remember, all right, LeBron James is one of the greatest high school basketball players we've ever seen. Kareem may have been the greatest high school basketball player ever to play as well. All right, let's not forget that, okay? He's the greatest college basketball player to ever play, in my opinion, and probably one of the top 3 or 4 of all times. He was also probably the greatest high school basketball players of all times as well. But so if we just threw the college in there, so that's an extra 4 years. The freshman year that he wasn't eligible, and then obviously the 3 years at UCLA when he just completely dominated. You're looking at, when you throw those together, the longevity part of it is neck and neck with him and LeBron as far as their dominance. But what I do think is, and I think that this is a positive for LeBron. I don't think this is a negative thing. Some people look at it as a negative thing, but I think the fact that that LeBron could grow up watching Michael Jordan, could grow up watching a Larry Bird, watching a Magic Johnson, even watching a John Stockton type guy, or even some of these guys, these big scorer type guys, in the 90s, the late 80s, early and mid 90s. I think that was a huge benefit to him. All right. I don't want to throw Kobe in there with that, because even though he watched Kobe a little bit, that they're pretty much the same era type guy. Kobe was 5 years ahead of him, 6 years ahead of him. But there was a little bit, maybe a Kevin Garnett, a Kobe, where LeBron kind of learned with the high school to pro jump. That may have been a benefit to him. But to me, he's the second best player. All right, I do think the number one, number two are probably on a different level than the number three. And like I said, if we throw the extra 4 years in there, then maybe we have a top three on a different tier. But LeBron, the court vision. All right, he led the league in assists a couple of years ago, which to me, like I said, I don't want to critique him too much, but that felt like the Wilt Chamberlain, I'm going to lead the league in assists just to show you I can do it type deal. I don't necessarily know that it was this makes us the best team we can be. type deal. I think it was more of a selfish, like, well, like I'm better than Jordan because I can, I have more assists. I won the assist title. But, I think that it was more of that. There was more selfishness into it than it just actually doing it. Uh, but I mean, he's one of the top 3 to 5 greatest passers of my lifetime, just in terms of just the vision, being able to get passes. Big time scorer, obviously, he's the NBA all time leading scorer, which is a longevity award, all right? To me, points per game for a career, to me, is probably a higher honor than the actual thing, and maybe that's a Jordan bias, but that I think that probably is more indicative of how you of a scorer. All right, LeBron, to my knowledge, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think LeBron's had one of those years where he averaged 35 plus a game, and but that. He is a really good scorer, and he's been able to do that at a high level for a really long time. For probably, I mean, his whole career he's been a points per game scorer, but just in terms of being a scorer, being able to get a bucket when you need to get a bucket, and people are guarding you and saying we're not going to allow you to get a bucket. That's what I call a scorer, and he's done that, at a high level for probably 18 of his 22 years, I would say, probably the last couple of years is kind of the old man years, that he's had, probably the greatest old man years ever, but still the old man years. And then probably his first year in the league, I don't know that he was a big time scorer. He's been a big time scorer the rest of his career, doing that. The downfall, obviously, with LeBron, the two downfalls is that he's not a great. He's an above average defender for his career, but he's not a great defender for his career. And then obviously he's not a great free throw shooter. Okay, so those would be the two downfalls. Other than that, he's unbelievable. All right. The rebounding is outstanding. All right. I think his leadership, he's one of those guys, and especially, and I think this is a post Jordan thing, or maybe even a post Magic thing. Even if you want to go, even if you don't want to put it on Jordan, a post Magic deal. But the leadership thing, it's overblown. All right, I'm not sure that he's a guy that just because they play with LeBron James, they're gonna just be unbelievable. All right, now he's gonna make his teammates better. He's one of those guys, but like I'm not sure that he's just willing to. You come play with LeBron James, and LeBron just makes you, you're not selfish anymore. You're not this anymore. I don't think so. I think that maybe going and playing for a contender might help you in that, or maybe playing where, you played for the Knicks and you average, and I'm not talking about anybody. I'm not. This isn't a J.R. Smith or anything like that. I'm not talking about anybody in particular, but say you played for the Knicks, you averaged 25 a game, but everybody thought you were selfish. And then you go to the Cavs and you play with LeBron, and it's he's such a great defender. He's a this, he's a that. And he doesn't score as much, but takes such better shots. Well, LeBron probably does do some things that help you, but you don't have to take bad shots when you play with LeBron. If you're the third option, the second option, whatever, like that's just basketball. Like that would be, you go play with Kevin Durant, you go play with the Steph Curry, you go play with these guys. You're gonna get better shots. That's the way it is. All right, so So I think that that's a little bit, the leadership thing is a little bit overblown with him, but he is an outstanding leader and probably one of the greatest ultra competitive guys. Maybe even competitive. I don't know. Ultra, I think as his old man game has increased, maybe his ultra competitive has increased. I'm not sure that he was ultra competitive in 2010, for example. All right. I don't know that he was ultra competitive in 2011. All right. I don't even know if he was ultra competitive in 2012. Once again, we might debate this on another thing because I think the Heat were probably better than the Thunder, but the Thunder kind of got robbed early on. They had a chance to go up with a 2-0 lead, pretty significant going into the last 5 games, and let's just say that the refs swallowed their whistle. NBA, all right. I think you guys know that as well as I do. So they may have swallowed their whistle a little bit in Game 2 of the 2012 NBA Finals down the stretch, and may have helped the Heat out a little bit. But anyways, LeBron James, without a doubt, top 2 player of all times. Okay, however you want to put him. If you want to put him 1, put him 1. I don't think he was a 1. I've watched both of those guys. I don't think he's better than Michael Jordan, who is our number 1. Okay, I'm not going to talk a lot about Michael Jordan because he's been talked about. All right, but here's the things that I'm going to say. Okay, and obviously these can be debatable. Michael Jordan, for most of his career, he had a very short career. People don't understand that. All right, now there were 2 years. Obviously, he was playing baseball that he retired. He didn't play. All right. So, but basically, even if you look, I think he only played for 15 years. He might have played for 16. I can't remember. Adding on the Wizards at the end. But you look at that. The guy was probably the best offensive player in the NBA for 10 of his 13 years with the Bulls. Maybe 11, 12. I don't know. But probably at least 10 of them. He was the best offensive player in the game. Okay, probably 8 of those, 7 or 8 of those years, he was the best defensive player in the game. He was the best defensive player in the game. All right, we've made it a habit now of saying, "Oh, LeBron James deserved that MVP." LeBron James, they just didn't give it to LeBron. That's all false. All right, LeBron James hadn't been an MVP player since 2013. You look at every one of those MVPs, and LeBron James probably didn't deserve any of those. Like, obviously, if he would have won them, you would think, all right, yeah, he had a great year, whatever, Michael Jordan legitimately, I think he won 5 MVPs, 4 MVPs. I'm not sure exactly the number. He legitimately deserved he lost out or deserved MVPs in years he didn't get it, as he did the years he won it. And the years he won it were big MVPs, right? Like he was obviously the MVP. There was not a discussion about how good he was, about his MVP-ness of those years. The years he won the MVP, which means he was the best player in the NBA, the most valuable player in the NBA. He legitimately won those. There was a year I know with Magic, obviously the Karl Malone one, but he deserved the MVP probably 4 or 5 more times in his career. All right, when you talk about LeBron, there's only probably 1 or 2 other years that he. I think LeBron's won 3 MVPs. He's probably at 5 total. If you looked at it, you say, that guy, LeBron probably deserved it that year. Okay. you know, there's probably 2 more years, right? Uh, like Michael Jordan was the MVP almost his entire career, every year for his entire career. Okay, pretty much. If you're probably talking about like 87. I'm not exactly sure on this, but like 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 96, 97, 98. Like he probably had legitimate MVP uh, times in every one of those years, right? Uh, like like I said, for almost his entire career, he was the greatest or the best offensive player. He might be the greatest scorer of all time. Probably is the greatest scorer of all times. Um, and he's probably a top 5 to 8 top defender of all times. Okay, um, the guy, like once again, I talked about it with Larry Bird. Michael Jordan, go watch him. Go watch him. Go watch video of him. Go watch tape of him and just watch it. You know, just go watch him play. Like, the guy was unbelievable. He was crazy, right? He was crazy, right? People talk about, oh, you put this guy from now, in '87, and he would have done that. Blah blah blah. Michael Jordan would be a 40 points a game scorer right now. If you put 1991 Michael Jordan in 2024, he would be a 40 points a game scorer. Okay? His game, I'm talking like a 91, 92 Michael Jordan, maybe 93 even. Michael Jordan, okay? He would have changed his game. He would shoot a lot more threes, okay? But off the bounce, nobody would have guarded him off the bounce. And you couldn't touch him now. Like, you couldn't touch him. He would legitimately, if he would have wanted to go for it, there would be times within the last five years probably that he could have went for 81. He could have went for 100. Legitimately. Like I said, now that would be a lot of shot that, he would be chasing it. Right? I'm not saying he would do it in a game that mattered or that, he would just do it just to do it. Like, he would have to chase it a little bit, which Wilt chased 100. Kobe chased 81. Once he kind of got to that point, he was chasing it. All right? Devin Booker chased 71 or whatever it was that he scored a couple of years ago. Obviously, David Robinson scored 73 in a game, on the last day of the season. Him and Shaq in a scoring title match, and David Robinson had nothing to play for. He goes for 73. He obviously was chasing that. All right, so Michael Jordan's the number one player of all time. All right, like I said, you can say, hey, it's LeBron. You can say that, and you can argue it, and we can argue it, and we can do that. We can debate it. We can do that. And I'm not saying that you're necessarily. I think you're wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong. I think you're wrong. But like, I watched both those guys. I saw almost their entire careers, both of them. Michael Jordan's the greatest player of all times. He's the greatest basketball player of all times. Right? The last thing that, I talked about him being offensive, being defensive, how great he was on both those ends. He's also the greatest ultra competitive guy of all times. He is legitimately the greatest ultra competitive guy of all times. All right? And like I said, we may get into this in another video about, the a-holeness of him. But, like, these things are not debatable. Like, these things are, like, whether you say, oh, he's the greatest or he's the second or whatever, like, he's a top 5 guy in all of these categories. All right? He is the only NBA player ever who is a top 5 guy in all of these categories. So, I mean, that if that doesn't say he's the greatest of all time, I don't know what does. All right, I don't know what does. Okay, this video went way longer than I was wanting it to. I hope you enjoy it. I hope that you've stuck with me here. You know, once again, this is a debate channel. It's a sports channel. It's a debate channel. We may even talk a little bit pulp culture or wrestling a little bit every once in a while, but pro wrestling, that is. But this is a debate channel. I welcome your comments and understand that we can go back and forth in the comments. We can go back and forth on video, whatever. But I hope you enjoy my content. I hope that you maybe have a similar list to mine. Put your list down in the comments. All right, I would love to read your what you think and how you would lay that out. And until next time, I'll see you later.